In your talk, you said science and God can exist together. Perhaps not atheism and theism, but science and God. My question is then, do you agree with C.S. Lewis's statement that one is forced to choose between Jesus of Nazareth either as Lord and Savior or as a madman, or can one let the question be at rest and not choose?
Welcome aboard. Drawing from C.S. Lewis's famous book, Mere Christianity, on the trilemma of Jesus Christ, this young lady asks if we can choose to opt for something else. Dr. Lennox responds to this question with compelling logic and shares a powerful story of a man to prove the testability of Christ.
Lewis said that Jesus Christ causes a dividing of opinions. You can't just say he was a good teacher for very obvious reasons, because he stood on planet Earth 20 centuries ago and he said, I am the truth. If one of your friends at the University of Chicago came to you tomorrow and said, excuse me, do you know who I am? I am the truth. What, you mean you're like Harvard, Veritas? You're the truth. I think you'd cart them off to the nearest psychiatric institution. And what Jesus did not mean was simply that he said true things. He's saying, I am the truth. What's the truth about this universe? Well, we can get scientific truth. We can get artistic truth. We can get historical truth. But as those questions go on digging deeper and deeper, every one of the chains of questions says Christ will come back to him. And he stands at the end of them and says, I am the truth. It's very difficult to see that he was an ordinary person. And this is the point Lewis is getting at. It's only a very superficial examination of the life of Christ that leads to this kind of thing. Well, he was a very good teacher. Yes, he was a very good teacher. But he made fundamental claims about himself, and himself in relation to the universe and to time. Imagine somebody else saying to you tomorrow in a physics class, by the way, we were discussing time this morning. Time's very interesting, you know. Before Abraham was, I am. What? Do you get it? They are huge claims. Now, how are we going to settle it? It's quite clear, as Lewis said, don't come around with some patronizing nonsense that he was a good teacher. Either he is utterly mad, but mad people don't behave like that.
Bart Ehrman, a well-known New Testament scholar, argues that the idea of Jesus being divine was a later invention by the early church, and that Jesus himself never actually claimed to be God. But here's the thing. Even in the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man from Daniel 7, a heavenly figure who comes on the clouds and receives worship. Now, Jesus didn't go around saying, I am God, worship me, in modern terms, but he spoke in ways that his Jewish audience clearly understood as divine. That's exactly why the religious leaders accused him of blasphemy. So the question isn't whether Jesus used our language, but whether his words carried divine weight in his own context.
And people have often said to me at the end of an evening like this, they said, look, come off it, Professor Lennox. All this talk, you know, but we love to say that this stuff is testable, and of course it's not testable. Isn't it? Isn't it? Of course it's testable. Let me give you an example of that. I was speaking at Penn State, and I didn't know there was a young Chinese student listening to me. And I went then, I think it was Harvard, weeks later, maybe months. And after I'd finished an evening like this, on the balcony, this student stood up and he yelled to the crowd, look at me. And of course we were all staggered, you know, and I looked at him, he wanted me to look at him, and everybody looked at me, look at me. And then he told us all, he said, I heard you speak at Penn State. My life was in a complete mess. I was falling apart. I had no hope. I was utterly miserable. And something you said resonated. And a few weeks later, I decided to commit my life to Christ. And he said, just look at me. And he was utterly radiant. And it said it all. Is Christianity testable? Of course it is. When I see young people and they're in despair and disillusionment, and I don't meet them for a while, they come back and I see a complete difference. What on earth happened to you? They may use language like, I met Jesus, or I trusted Christ, or I received, whatever language they use, it doesn't matter. When you see that not once, not twice, hundreds of times in your life, you begin to use your little logic and add 2 and 2 and get 4. There's something in this. It actually works. And in the end, I wouldn't do these lectures if I didn't believe that it actually works. Because I firmly believe, and you may never have heard a science professor say this in your lives, I firmly believe that if you tonight feel that you're in that kind of a position and ready to make that sort of commitment, you can experience peace with God and forgiveness and new life before you leave this building. That's how real I believe this whole stuff is. Science only gets you so far. Then you must get much more specific. Because, ladies and gentlemen, God is not a theory. He's a person. And getting to know a person is a much bigger and, in the end, an infinitely more satisfying thing than getting to know a theory.
Indeed, God is not a theory, a force, or just an abstract idea. He is a living, personal being. In the Christian faith, Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. He is the embodiment of God in human flesh, not just a teacher or prophet, but God with us. Through Jesus, God steps into our world, not to demand religion, but to invite us into a personal relationship with Him. Thanks for watching. God bless you.